Everybody, thank you for your patience. Hi, and it's really great to see so many of you here today. I'm Barbara Barron, and next to me there on the screen is Claire Lipschultz. The two of us are state policy advocates for the National Council of Jewish Women, California. And as most of you know, NCJW is a national organization guided by Jewish values to promote social and economic justice for women, families, and children. In partnership with 60 NCJW sections and 200,000 advocates across the country, we work to make change at the local, state, and national level. Today is part of an ongoing effort by volunteers from NCJW's 6 sections across our state, and in particular, the hardworking policy advocacy leaders in Saddleback, Los Angeles, Long Beach and Greater Orange County, San Francisco, Contra Costa, and Sacramento, who make up the statewide State Policy Advocacy Committee. So these are the folks that did the analysis to select and understand our priority bills this year, priority bills and budget asks, and they're responsible for recruiting, educating, and training the many of you that are here today. And we want to especially recognize Nabila Sosa from the LA section, who worked hand in glove with the two of us to plan this lobby day. You'll meet her later this morning.
Ultimately, it's all of you advocates who will make the difference. Our advocacy partners and legislators repeatedly confirm that our faith-based voice is a unique and important one in the discussions of policy. Most of us, if not all of us, are not trained lobbyists or experts in the policy areas that we will be discussing today. With the legislative representatives, their staff, and legislators who will be on the call. But what we are is the voice of values that come from our compassion and the pursuit of justice for every human being that our faith compels us to follow. It is the job of your legislator to listen and to represent your concerns. And that is our power. Over the next few days, as we will all be visiting our legislators either via Zoom or phone call or in person, we're going to use our power and our voices. The speakers that you're about to hear are leaders and partners, expert in policy fields of deep concern to us. We hope that they will deepen your understanding of the issues that we'll be lobbying on. And in addition to the speakers on each of our individual priority bills, we are honored to have 2 keynote speakers, Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia and Shamika Gaskins, who will give us sort of an overview of issues of importance.
So the California State Policy Committee that I talked about earlier selected 3 priority bills / budget requests for this lobby day out of many, many worthy options. You can imagine what's going on in the state of California now. There was lots and lots and lots of important bills and budget asks moving that we considered. But given limited time and energy on the part of our advocates, we wanted to focus on 3. And so one chosen focus is to protect Californians against the looming threat to the 50-year-old constitutional protection of abortion access and the barrage of states limiting and prohibiting abortions. And as well, you'll hear us talk about more today. The bill we care about is thinking both about how to protect California as a place of refuge for women from other states who need to flee here to find access to abortion, and also to support the ways that we can be helpful to them. A second major focus, one that was front and center last year and will be front and center probably for a long time, is a focus on the essential role childcare plays in allowing women to work and support their families and for children to flourish. An already overburdened and underfunded system has been badly battered by the pandemic. And last year we fought like crazy, and we got part of the way. But this year we want to move the ball further down, whatever it is, you move balls down, but we know this is going to be a long and protracted battle, and you'll hear more from our speaker about that. Finally, we've been really long concerned, and we heard this from our advocates loud and clear all across the state, about the growing number of Californians who are homeless. And so there's, you know, millions of different approaches that need to be implemented to begin to address this problem. The one that we're supporting this year is an innovative community approach to providing some of California's homeless with access to both housing and a wide range of supportive services, which, as you'll hear more about, we think is really essential. Communities coming together to provide the kind of range of services that homeless folks need to get themselves housed and fed and back to work. We believe that the California budget surplus, this year California has a likely surplus of more than $60 billion, which presents us with a much welcome opportunity to make bold investments that create a more equitable California in the short and the long term, where all people can thrive and survive, regardless of age, gender, race, and zip code.
So thank you, Barbara. I want to say at this point also, switching just for a moment to my other hat, and I realize, Barbara, we did not introduce ourselves, so we should take a moment to do that. I am Claire Lipschultz, and as Barbara said, we are both state policy advocates. We both actually are on the board of the Sacramento section, and I am vice president of the national board of the National Council of Jewish Women. And so I did, in that capacity, just want to take a moment to encourage everybody on the call to become involved and aware of the national campaign for abortion access. It's called 73 Forward, and you can find out about it and all the fantastic resources and educational materials about abortion access and how we're going to fight like hell to keep it. If you go to 73forward.org, the name, of course, refers to 1973, when we first, as a country, had created a constitutionally protected right to abortion through the Roe v. Wade decision. And it is that very constitutional right which is in acute danger of being completely overthrown. We're already seeing that at the state level throughout the country. We will hear more about that later, but I really wanted to encourage everybody to realize that what we're doing in California is part of a larger campaign on the part of our national organization. A few housekeeping points. We've had the slide up that spoke about them, but I will talk about them again for a moment. Please, for those of you that have joined a little late, say hello in the chat. please in your square, say where you're from, what section or other organization you're involved with, along with your preferred pronouns. And you can correspond, if you will, with issues, concerns, whatever you might want to say to the group through chat throughout the program. But please, don't get so distracted that you're not listening to our wonderful speakers. Again, for those that came on late, we're doing we're taking a tally of favorite Passover foods, a single Passover food. So please add that to the chat. You are muted. Please stay on mute throughout the program unless you are asked to speak. If so, after you're done, please remute yourself. If you are experiencing any tech problems, our wonderful tech person, Ryan, her telephone number is at the top of the chat, her text number, and you can come to her with any problems you're having, and she has all the answers you would need. Now, with regard to the questions that you might have after each speaker, because of the size of the group, we're going to ask you to put the questions for the speakers in the chat. And Barbara and I and Nabila will look at those questions and ask them on your behalf for as long as time permits between the speakers. There are no official breaks, so feel free to stretch and move around, get some tea or coffee, but hopefully you can stay within earshot. Okay, so we are now going to check, and I see that our keynote speaker, Assembly Member Cristina Garcia, is on. Barbara?
Oh, fantastic. Welcome, Assembly Member Garcia. Well, it is my great honor to introduce Assemblymember Cristina Garcia. We have worked closely with her for years on many, many different causes. And she is chairwoman of California's Legislative Women's Caucus and has served in the state assembly since first being elected in 2012, representing California's 58th Assembly District. Since being elected, she's made addressing gender inequity a priority. She's also a passionate advocate for issues concerning civic engagement. Today, as a statewide leader, she continues her efforts to protect and educate our state's children and is dedicating to educating, engaging, and empowering her community at all levels. Finally, she's been a staunch proponent on environmental justice. She's been recognized by California Forward with the Distinguished California Forward Thinkers Award, and previously earned the Distinguished Woman of the Year Award from the California State Assembly. Under her leadership, the Legislative Women's Caucus has created a united effort to strengthen and expand access to abortion to ensure that California is a national beacon for reproductive freedom. We'll hear about their visionary plan to confront the growing assaults on abortion and other reproductive freedoms across the nation. Our priority bills, one of our priority bills, AB 1666, is part of their proposals. Welcome, Assemblymember Garcia.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me. I apologize for being a little late. My flight got delayed in Sacramento, but I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for the work ahead that we're all going to be embarking on. We have nearly half of the states in the nation who have been working aggressively to take away our rights to be able to control our own bodies and have reproductive freedom and make decisions about when and if we have children out there, and when and if we have an abortion. And so it's a really scary time for millions of individuals out there, millions of women out there. And here in California, we're really concerned about that. And we want to make sure that we are a refuge for anyone seeking treatment. But we also realize that even within our own state, there are holes, and we don't have equity, and we don't have access readily available if you're in a rural community, or if you're from a marginalized group, our LGBTQ trans community, our Latino community out there. And so we are doing all we can to ensure that we welcome anyone needing an abortion here to California, but that we also ensure that if you're already here in California, we increase access for you, and we increase positive outcomes for you as well. The reality is that I'm 45 years old, and a lot of individuals fought for my right and fought to ensure that we had a victory with Roe versus Wade, and that we get to control our own bodies. And in my lifetime, I haven't seen one of my rights taken away, but that threat is real. That threat is likely, and we have to take it seriously for ourselves and for the next generation out there. And so the Women's Caucus is united in their steadfast commitment to work with the Future of Abortion Council to ensure that if Roe versus Wade is overturned or gutted, the 36 million women and people who could become pregnant who do not live in California are able to turn to California as a beacon of hope. On a personal level, I know what the power of having access to reproductive freedom. In college, I turned to my local Planned Parenthood to be able to access birth control, to be able to control my destiny, ensure that I could focus on my studies and not anything else out there. I did not want to be a statistic like so many in my community out there. And that freedom has given me the opportunities to travel the world, to become a teacher, to become an assembly member, and to think about when and how I want to start a family out there on my terms and not anyone else's terms out there. And so this fight is personal. I want to make sure that we all continue to have those freedoms no matter what state we live in as well. And so the Women's Caucus is working hard. We expect almost a 3,000% increase in out-of-state women of reproductive age who would find their nearest abortion provider here in California if Roe versus Wade is overturned. And so how do they travel here? How do they get here? How do they make sure that they are going to a place that will treat them properly and give them the care that they need in there? And so that's part of what the Women's Caucus is working on, to make sure that we have information on the internet that's accurate, that's going to help an individual coming out of state to get the help that they need. And so we have 13 bills that we are working on with the Future of Abortion Council out there, including AB 1666, which is one of your priorities that Rebecca Barra-Cahan is carrying. For myself, I have two bills, AB 2320 and 2586 that also come, 2586 that also come with a budget ask. And here specifically, I'm focused on equity. We know the reality that if you're a marginalized community, that you're in a low-income community, access is not the same. So we have two pilots, one to ensure that clinics in our backyards are able to provide reproductive services to community members. It's what's around, it's what's trusted, it's what I grew up going to on a regular basis in my backyard. And so we want to give those clinics the power to be the providers for our individuals out there. I'm also working on creating a working group to start to look at systemically, why do we have these inequities and how do we start to close them and hopefully provide additional legislation that we will be carrying. One of our priority bills, SB 245 by Senator Gonzalez, that removes all cost sharing or all co-pays for abortions, has been signed by the governor on March 22nd as well. And so we have our first success in this package. But we are working hard. The Women's Caucus is 38 legislators and 5 constitutional officers. And this is our main priority this year, ensuring that in the case that Roe versus Wade is overturned, California can honor that promise we made to be a refuge for anyone seeking services here in California as well. And so excited for all of you, for the work that you're doing, excited for the work that we have, but also really worried for my counterparts who are not in the state of California. I know what that means. And so we are also looking to ensure that California is a leader to help lead the country in how to do this right, and hopefully help put pressure on our federal partners so that they pass legislation at the federal level to enshrine Roe versus Wade, so we do not have to be relying on what the dynamics of the Supreme Court look like to continue to protect my right and our rights to freedom. And so that's my update. I do appreciate being here. I do appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank all of you for your continued steadfast work over the years to ensure that we have adequate access to reproductive health and abortion access across the state and the nation.
So if anybody has questions for Assembly Member Garcia, again, please put them in the chat. Claire, I think you have some questions for her that you might want to share.
Well, there's one question from the chat, or a request. Can you list the bills specifically that the caucus is advocating for in the plan?
Yes, and so Sulema Landa, who works for our Women's Caucus, is here on the Zoom with us today. I will ask her to put a link to our website where we have all of our bills out there that we're working with the Future of Abortion Council or FAB Council with, as well as our budget priorities out there. And so we are lucky to have a robust package by our members.
So, and could you speak a moment about the Future of Abortion Council? Did I get that right? FA Future. Yeah. Okay, great. Fab.
Yes. So they are working, it's a group that includes Planned Parenthood, Latinas for Reproductive Justice, Black Women Wellness. It has over 40 organizations that came together and did a report that the legislature asked for our leadership here, preparing for the possibility that Roe versus Wade last year asked these stakeholders to come together and to do an analysis of what the landscape looks like in California. What are we doing right? What do we need to work on? And how do we prepare for the nearly, 36 million individuals we think are going to have to come to California, because that's the nearest state for them to access out there. And so they came out with a number of recommendations during the fall, at which point we decided as a caucus that we were going to take the most important part of that package and work with them, work with our leadership. We are blessed that the Speaker Pro Tem of the Senate is part of our Women's Caucus member, who's very committed to these issues. And we are blessed to have a great partner in the Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon, as well. And so together we have prioritized this. And so we've taken a number of priorities out of there to compile this package that the Women's Caucus is excited to work on. And that also includes budget dollars that come to ensure that this package can be successful out there. And so all these organizations are doing great work and are shepherding different pieces as leaders, but then collectively to ensure that this package gets through. And we are one united voice here in California. And I think creating a role model for other states. We have colleagues in Connecticut, colleagues in Washington and Oregon who have started to reach out to the work we're doing here in California to be able to replicate some of those work. But really the foundation of that work that we're doing is because of the Future of Abortion Council coming together as stakeholders to give us that North Star of where we need to be going.
Yes, thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, and some of what you're doing is protecting the providers here, right? Folks who are going to be providing services for people coming from out of state. Also raising monies to expand access here, I presume.
Yeah, so we know we need to expand access here. I'll give you an example of a bill that we're working on. SB 1142 by Ms. Caballero and by Ms. Skinner, Senator Caballero and Senator Skinner, does two pieces. One, it's creating a website with information so that it's clear that where you're going is a reputable place and you know ahead of time the type of services they have, so you don't have to come out of state and guess out here. We are also creating a fund that would allow us to put in public and private dollars, and our goal is mostly private dollars, to be able to help pay for services for people coming out of the state who might not have insurance that covers these services, but also to help pay for things like travel out here. And so we are doing what we can, both thinking proactively with state dollars, but also private dollars to ensure that we have a system to help individuals, women across state lines as well. We are working with Ms. Bonta and Ms. Wicks to ensure that providers that are here in the state providing abortions to individuals from out of state are legally protected, financially protected. We want to make sure their assets are not going to be something that other states come after as well. We also want to make sure data and information is private and protected. And so that's part of what these set of bills also include as well. We are also working to ensure that we have additional dollars for individuals who are getting their specialties. So we're helping to pay for those specialties so that we have additional providers who have the skill set to provide abortions also. And so part of the work we're doing is that we ensure that we know that we don't have enough providers who are doing abortion to fill the void. And so how do we get more providers into that field? And so we're paying for some of those studies as well with some of the bills that we have proposed.
So, our organization does advocacy, as you can see today. But we also do a lot of community service work. And so another question that we would have for you is, how can we be of help? What can our network, you didn't hear us say, but we have a network of chapters across the state. And how can we be helpful in this?
Some of these bills are going to be big fights, and so we needed to advocate for our bills. We have SB 1375 by Pro Tem Atkins on nurse practitioners being able to provide abortion services as well, clearly with the skill set and the training, but being able to provide. That's going to be a fight. That's a scope fight, that we're going to have out there. And so we know we have some big lips. And so the first thing we need is for individuals to speak up and let their legislators know that all of these bills are important and we need their vote. The time to act is now, and we need to put aside ego and do, vote for bills that are important. I think the second piece is, as we are doing this work, it's, working with our community-based organizations. They are the trusted sources. And so how do we work with them to help them provide the services that they need? Our clinics are underfunded at this point, understaffed out there. And so we really need to do all we can, both in the community, but at the state, to shore up these clinics that for a lot of communities, including in the city of Bell Gardens where I live, it's all we have. It's a set of clinics that have been taking care of 60,000 constituents in my community before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now. And so sometimes reaching out to your local clinic and asking, how can I help? If you have extra resources, can you share them with the clinic there as well? And then finally, I think, we need to destigmatize. We need to be able to say the word abortion. We're still really afraid to say that. And so, being clear about our words is important. Being clear that not that everyone that's looking for an abortion is a woman. We have our trans community also, and trying to be more inclusive is something that the Women's Caucus is aggressively working on out there, as well as we're doing education about this. And so being inclusive is something that we can all do. And that just really comes down to a little bit of practice and training. I don't always get it right, but constantly trying to work on practice and training on the words I choose to make sure that I'm being inclusive to different community members out there. And so while I talk about women a lot, I approach this job on my experience. I try to remember often to also speak about other individuals who don't identify as women that also need access to these services, and creating a space where they feel welcome, but also a space where practitioners have the training to ensure that they are going to be taken care of. I'm working with Mr. Weiner on a bill this year to help increase the training and awareness for our practitioners around our trans community.
I do have a question around training that somebody has brought up in the chat. Are there any protections, or requirements really, as a way to put it, I suppose, that the state can impose on medical schools in California to teach abortion techniques and procedures to their medical students?
So let me start off with the UC system. They're constitutionally protected and get to do their own rules. And so we can only recommend to the UCs what they do. We can impose on what happens at the Cal States a little bit more. They're not constitutionally provided. A lot of times we try to do more of the carrot and the stick by providing additional dollars out there. Once we move past that into the private institutions, we can pass laws. Those are big fights oftentimes. And so more often than not, we've been trying to work with the carrots instead of the sticks out there for our different institutions and our different universities to teach this. I think part of the problem also is oftentimes we might be, the UCs, for example, might be partnering with different medical groups out there who do not practice and do not give abortion. So we have been trying to put pressure at the state level to ensure that if they're going to have a contract with the UCs, it is going to be someone that's going to provide access to birth control and abortions and all the reproductive health that their members need out there. And so we are trying to find creative ways to use the budget and the dollars that we give to push them or incentivize them. And sometimes it does have to be a stick with those dollars as well. But we haven't gotten to that full aggressive state. We are also looking at, how do we expand who can provide some of this, or how do we, for example, with Senator Leyva, we work to make it easier for students on campus to be able to get Plan B, which is the pill that you can take the morning after unprotected sex to avoid a pregnancy. As well, we're trying to make it easier for individuals to be able to access medical abortions that you could do in the first 6 weeks of your pregnancy as well. And so we are trying to find other ways that remove barriers and make it easier to be able to have a system that's working for everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much for that full answer. One of the members sitting here today is asking about, and you touched on this, about how the state might be working and the creation of their fund for monies to help out-of-state people pay for the cost of getting to the state and once in the state for their abortions. And there are organizations that have been doing that for years, private organizations. Can you speak just a little bit about how you see that partnership working?
I think the state sees themselves as a clearinghouse, and so we would create the website that has information and has a way to connect you to those groups that have been doing this for a long time. We're not trying to recreate any wheels here. Instead, we're trying to capitalize on what we already have and help supplement those efforts and help connect individuals to the people on the ground who are doing all this work. And so we see ourselves more of a clearinghouse, and we see ourselves paying to put up the website and maintain it and identify where these groups are at, where these dollars are at out there. We identify working with private partners to help supplement the funds out there and move money from private industry to help pay for whether it's flights or healthcare or whatever that might be. And so our main goal is that we actually become a place where you can find accurate information that can connect you to what you're looking for quickly and easily out on the ground. And so we know there's a tool out there. We know there are individuals. We know there's groups like this group here. And we want to make sure that when someone's looking, that they're not lost and having to find 100 websites and not clear who's reliable and who's not. We want to be that source here in the state where they know where if they come to our website, they're going to get adequate information and find the partners that they need.
Thank you. Another point I want to really underscore that you spoke about, and that's the importance of using the word abortion, saying it, feeling comfortable saying it. It really resonates. I also want to encourage those sitting here today to, if you feel comfortable, to share your own personal abortion story. 1 in 4 women of reproductive age will have an abortion during their reproductive lifetime. It's something that is healthcare, and that has been accessed over the years a lot. And we should feel comfortable talking about it and letting people know that, yes, it's your daughter, it's your neighbor, it's your niece who in fact have had abortions and did well afterwards and were able to go on with their lives. And personalizing the issue can be very impactful.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've been trying to do is reach out to abortion providers and just women's healthcare providers to tell them how much we appreciate the good work that they're doing, because they're really under siege. But we would love if you could keep us in mind and think about ways in which our network can be, in addition to doing the kind of advocacy, and I hope everyone listening here will take to heart Assemblymember Garcia's plea that we reach out and support a whole range of the bills that she just detailed. We have a rapid response team that that we call on for just that purpose as bills are coming up in front of the legislature. So we encourage you to join that rapid response team this year more than ever. We need your help. You heard there's a huge range of bills that we're trying to get through to support and preserve women's rights, people's rights, as you said. So thank you again so much for joining us. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. More importantly, I can't tell you how much we appreciate the good work you're doing. It's really important.
I want to say one last thing before I leave. we have 13 bills that are being carried, and the Women's Caucus has been outspoken, and we are going to continue to work and put our full weight behind this. And we know that this is just one step of more things we need to do. So we're committed to the long haul in this space. But my members are being attacked by a lot of individuals. They are being protested. They are showing up to events out there. And it gets scary sometimes because you look around, you're like, who has my back? And so the other thing I would say, in addition to lobbying members to vote on these bills, is rallying around some of these Women Caucus members who are carrying this bill and letting them know that you have their back. And just a simple note, thank you, we have your back. We know it's not easy, it goes a really long way, because sometimes you're like, wait, am I doing this alone? And is it worth it when I have to go and get reelected every 2 years? And so I've been talking to the members. Some of them had protesters show up at their community events. There's an organized effort by individuals showing up to our community events to disrupt and create chaos and really force the event to end over our positions. Events like Earth Day, nothing to do with this issue. And so they are co-opting these spaces. And it's nerve-wracking when you're dealing with those women. They're not always our community members. Let me say that, we understand that. But I think sometimes we all get so busy doing the work, which I much appreciate. I think just dropping that quick note to the members who are carrying this package and telling them, thank you, we have your back, keep working, goes a really long way. Those little notes kind of get us through our day as we need to keep chugging along. And so I also wanted to bring that to your attention this weekend. In particular, I had a handful of members reach out to me about events being disrupted out there. And it's fine. We're women, we know how to take it, but a little bit of love goes a long way as we continue to do this work.
Well, we're on it. We will. We've been trying to do that kind of thing, and we would love to. So thank you for the good thought. And again, thank you for your good work.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you. Well, that was inspirational, motivational, and as Barbara said, we have a priority abortion bill that we are going to be talking about later today, and we will really take to heart and think about a way that we can, as a statewide network, have the backs and show the love to the legislators that are stepping out in front to protect our rights. So we'll be calling on all of you to be part of that effort. I am now thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Shamika Gaskins. Hi, Shamika. I'm thrilled to introduce you, the president and CEO of GRACE and the End Childhood Poverty California program. She's worked in law and public policy, specializing in legislative, regulatory, and policy issues associated with criminal justice reform and children's rights. Prior to joining GRACE, Shamika was executive director of the Children's Defense Fund, California, where she led statewide advocacy, policy, program, and organizing efforts to ensure access to quality, affordable health coverage and care for children in low-income families, reform the juvenile justice system, promote educational equity and child poverty, and improve outcomes for children of color. And I guess somewhere in between all that, you slept, Shamika. I'm not sure when, but doing all the good work. Shamika formerly served as the acting deputy assistant attorney general in the Office of Legal Policy of the U.S. Department of Justice. And prior to joining DOJ, she was in private practice. Shamika serves on the boards of Impact Justice and the California Budget and Policy Center, and is commissioner on the LA County Commission for Children and Families. She is also an attorney, and her writings have appeared in USA Today, the Sacramento Bee, Los Angeles Daily News, Cal Matters, and other legal journals. Shamika brings her vast experience to direct a most audacious effort to end childhood poverty in California. And we're so lucky to have her today to explain the problem and the plan for solving it and how we can be part of the solution. And I am proud that one of the priority bills of the End Childhood Poverty Plan, AB 92, is one of our priority bills. Shamika, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. What a lovely, lovely introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? I thought my
Yes.
earphones were charged and they weren't. So first of all, it's such a opportunity to be here, to be with you all. It's so wonderful to see so many faces in the Zoom boxes. And I'm sure at some point you all got together and that was even more lovely. But it really is an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you all today. You know, your leadership, your advocacy, your action, your bravery and courage, you know, just listening to the conversation about abortion just now, really is inspiring. And I know that all of you have been working for so long to improve the lives of women and children and families in California and beyond. And I just want to especially thank Barbara and Claire for inviting me to be here to share a little bit about the work and the progress here in California. And to, you know, I was looking at who's following me. And so I hope to stay on for as long as I can to hear also about those priority bills as well. So, you know, you heard my bio, but I thought that before I launched into the work and what we must continue to do to keep the needs of those most vulnerable and marginalized front and center this year, that I should probably tell you a little bit about myself and Grace, because I know that while the End Child Poverty California campaign has been around, you know, for several years now and making a lot of noise and impact, what's behind the End Child Poverty California campaign is the organization of Grace that many don't know quite a lot about. So just to start, I come to this work incredibly humbled and blessed to have had this career that you heard about in law and policy for almost 20 years. But my advocacy started really at a very young age, as my parents were both very politically active, even though we didn't have very much. I was born in Washington, D.C., so you can see where the sentiment came from. And my family moved when I was in elementary school, though, back to my dad's hometown in Lake City, South Carolina, where his aging parents were. So growing up there as a Black Catholic family in a really small town, my parents had to work really hard to overcome racism, religious discrimination, and so much more to provide for us. And we relied on government programs such as SNAP and WIC and CHIP, and yes, charities like the Lions Club that paid for my first pair of glasses so I could see the board in second grade. And it was difficult at times, but my parents really kept us hopeful that we would be able to change our circumstances, and that even in the midst of our own struggle, it was our duty to help others. They ran a food bank out of our church for migrant farm workers who came every seasonally to farm tobacco in our town, which was known for. And over time, they convinced the federal government to invest in a migrant Head Start program, which ran for over a decade to make sure that children didn't have to live in the fields during the day while their parents worked, and to make sure that we could provide wraparound services for those who were working seasonally. So at a very early age, I knew what poverty felt like. And I also saw how it could be even more cruel for our undocumented brothers and sisters that were coming to work in those fields and being mistreated in every imaginable way. So while I was able to go into law school and work in criminal justice reform during the Obama years, in my own life, I would point to poverty, growing up in poverty as the first manifestation of injustice that I experienced. And why it's that at the heart of the purpose of my work is to get others to believe in what Nelson Mandela said, which is overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it's an act of justice. It is the protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life. And I truly believe that. And that's why I transitioned here to Grace, which, you know, gives me the opportunity to continue to really focus in on this issue and the moral crisis and impairment that we have here in California. So Grace, you know, was founded by the Daughters of Charity, who have been working for almost 400 years. Their patron founder was St. Vincent de Paul, who dedicated himself to serving the poor and finding clerical ministries. And the idea of Grace began from what I like to describe as the work that happens at the back door of churches. So the Daughters of Charity Ministries created schools, Meals on Wheels, senior centers, hospitals, orphanages, many in LA, in the Bay Area, and across the West Coast. And they wanted to actualize their vision to not only serve the poor, but to advocate and organize for change. So in 2013, they founded GRACE, and the words that make up the acronym are how we organize our work. So gather, every gathering of people who care about children is building the power of the movement to end child poverty. Respect, respecting the human rights of children defines who we are as a society and as human beings. Advocate, we work to make sure the voice of children is heard in every meeting, with every decision, and our shared responsibility toward their welfare is part of both. Change, we seek to change legislation, policy, funding, opinions, hearts, minds, and whole lives. Engage, we seek to engage on all levels, to bind others to this cause, to influence those who are decision makers, and to come together with community. So St. Vincent de Paul believed that the poor suffered less from a lack of generosity than a lack of organization. And so GRACE and the End Child Poverty California campaign's goal is to help organize communities, organizations, and policymakers so that we can move, like you all do, advocacy into action and to uproot poverty, which is a symptom of the bad policies we have enacted and perpetuated for decades. Policies that we all know are rooted in oppression and intolerance. So the policies that have also allowed California to be one of the largest states in the country that has combated high child poverty rates. Many organizations have been fighting to change these conditions and to pass new laws for decades. And we have had success that we can be proud of in California. So we've increased our minimum wage. We've eliminated the maximum family grants in our CalWorks, our state TANF program. We've expanded healthcare coverage. We've created our own tax credit to get more cash to families. But in 2018, we still had over 2 million children living in poverty. And it wasn't concentrated in one jurisdiction, but all across the state, urban, rural, everywhere. Families were struggling in a state with enormous wealth. And as we all know, the 5th largest economy in the world. So GRACE pushed for the establishment of a legislative task force to create a plan to lift children and families out of poverty. The task force was chaired by the Department of Social Services and GRACE, and it brought together experts and advocates across multi-sectors: housing, homelessness, traditional anti-poverty groups, those working on the safety net, education, early ed, child welfare, juvenile justice, workforce development, all to draft this plan. And Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality provided the data and the metrics to show if we made investments, then we could end deep child poverty and reduce overall child poverty by half within 10 years. And the goal was to have the best data, research, and lived experience to inform this roadmap that would redefine the legislative process. The plan was completed in 2019, and we handed it then to Governor Newsom, who had already declared that poverty was going to be his North Star of his campaign. There were 43 recommendations in there. And then we went to work to organize with all our partners and all those who came to the table to move these policies forward through the legislature. And I can say today, 3.5 years later, of the 43 policies, 38 have been either adopted as identical or consistent with the recommendations. We have 12 of the 38 are one-time or limited term solutions, primarily that were focused on dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And 26 are permanent ongoing commitments by the state to invest in children and families. That totaled up to close to $11 billion in 2021 to 2022, and over $13 billion annually when all of the programs are fully ramped up. It's been remarkable to see how much has happened that we even think was feasible just 4 years ago. So having a plan and a roadmap has worked in California. It's given our policymakers a way to focus their efforts. It's given advocates the opportunity for us to move out of our silos and see how all of our areas impact children and families can be addressed when we come together. And it's given us an opportunity to demand all that we need: affordable housing, cash, healthcare, inclusion of immigrant families. And so what we need to do now is really keep this momentum going. We cannot let up. So as you heard, we've had these strategic, thoughtful investments by the governor and the legislature over the last 3 years, but we know it's not done. And what we know is, even though in 2021, according to PPIC, we went from having over 1.6 million children in poverty to under 1 million children in poverty. Incredible. But we also know that now that the federal child tax credit has expired, we are at risk of 1.7 million children falling back into poverty. Those families who were getting that additional cash just for those 6 months really moved the needle. So we know that we have to continue to fight for those who are struggling, and that not one investment is going to just do it, right? And so one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that the coalition is working with other coalitions across the state, the Interfaith Coalition, organizations like yours who are coming to the table and fighting together and saying, we won't be pitted against each other. We know we need all of these things, and we're going to imagine together that we will have these things for every California. And so in March, we launched a campaign called 10 billion to do the Fight for Poverty campaign, which you can kind of see behind me, where we talk about how we are imagining that our children and families in our state are nourished, we are respected, we are healthy, we are valued. And what that translates for us is into several budget asks. You know, the state has this massive surplus, I'm sure you've heard about, for a second year in a row. And so what we are fighting for in the budget, you know, is again, knowing how cash has been so critical to keeping families off the street, keeping, you know, battling the inflation prices, is we're pushing for a one-time California child tax credit expansion. So we have the young child tax credit, which provides $1,000 for families under 30,000 who have children between age 0 to 6. And so we want to make good on our promise that we have, when we have this wealth, that we're going to put it to work for families. And so we are proposing that the legislature expand that tax credit just for this year while we have this surplus, to provide one-time $2,000 per child tax refund for children up to the age 17 in a household. So it looks much more like the federal child tax credit. So it'd be per child. It'd be a little bit more than what we would have gotten as just the YCTC. And we estimate that this will cost about $3.8 billion, but it'll keep 1.7 million children and families out of poverty. And so that's one proposal, is AB 2589, and is co-authored by Assemblymember Santiago. Another that we are doing is we're working with our early ECE partners to fund dignified wages, as you guys talked about, AB 92 with Reyes for childcare providers. And as you've heard, you'll hear a little bit more later too, you know, I won't go too much into it, but this will provide an increase to the provider rates. We know that last year there was an increase, but it's not enough. They were still so far behind in making livable wages. So the research is there that so many childcare providers are also the very recipients of our social safety net programs. So how can we expect to make sure that they're taking good care of children when they can't even take care of their own children? And so that is critically important, that we honor them with dignified wages and work, because they're doing the hard work so that the rest of us, like myself, can go to work. And so this is really important. And I'm so glad that this is one of your priority bills. You know, it's $187 million. But again, no, the whole cost is 1.75 billion, because we're also including in that, you know, the ability to do infrastructure and the waiver of family fees. But again, money that's worth it. We're also pushing that, you know, for the young child tax credit really is going to reach those who make less than $30,000, that expansion proposal. But we know that there's others in between $30,000 and about $75,000 that are still feeling the pinch, right? And so we're pushing for the legislature to think about how they could effectively have another Golden State stimulus. If you guys remember that during the pandemic, it was where we were able to get cash to households, $600 or so. And it's really interesting because now, I'm sure you've heard of the governor's gas rebate proposal, and the legislature has been pushing for something that's more targeted and more equitable for families. And we really do believe that we did this already. We did this during the pandemic. We built the infrastructure of how we get cash out in an equitable way to families who really need it. those who are on CalWorks or SSI with I-10s, the whole gamut. So we really are pushing that this is another way that we can get folks into the middle. We could build consensus around what the governor's trying to do, what the legislature wants to see happen. Is like, let's just go back to what we know worked and figure it out. So that's another piece that we're working on. Again, we're also thinking about the future with this wealth, with the extended surplus. So we know that families need cash today, but we also want to think about how do we use the surplus that we have to see the future for our children. So SB 854, which is a bill sponsored by Nancy Skinner, establishes a baby bonds program for children who unfortunately lost their parent or primary caregiver to COVID, or children who are on foster care, so that we provide trust accounts that can grow over time until they're 18 years old, so that when they reach that critical juncture of transitioning into adulthood, they have some financial support to make sure that they prosper. We know these children have, little to no support, particularly foster youth, when they make that leap and out of care and into on their own. And we know that children who've lost their primary caregiver to COVID, which is about 28,000 kids alone in California, an unprecedented number. Most of the folks who died of COVID were people of color who were low income. And so again, we know these children are going to reach those, will not have that additional support when they are at that age, when they need that help. And so the goal is to make sure that we're building a system that thinks about them today and in the future tomorrow, and that we have the funds and resources to help support them so that they can be successful and that we won't have to rely on social safety net programs to be able to make it. Finally, I think we really applaud the Assembly's continued inclusion in the budget. Our plan to end deep child poverty in the CalWorks program. One of the things that we really pushed for the last, even before the End Child Poverty Plan came along, was that there should be if we have a CalWorks TANF program, there should be no families living in deep poverty under any circumstances in this state, because that means that we know what the scientific research has shown, what it means to live in deep poverty does to children's their brain development and everything else. And so the legislature for this year is continuing on its commitment to raise the CalWorks grants so that children and families are above that deep poverty line. And so we're trying to get this last piece of it through, to have 100% pass through, to reach the grant levels so that they include enough money for that. And then finally, we're working with to establish a safety net for all with the Safety Net for All Coalition, which is looking to build an excluded workers program for California. So if you remember during the pandemic, those who were left out of unemployment benefits, but who also lost all their jobs were our undocumented brothers and sisters due to their immigration status. And what New York did was create this excluded workers program so that those workers could pay into their own unemployment system, So if anything happened in terms of a pandemic or job loss, they could also pull down those resources. And so we're pushing for California to build that same infrastructure, considering where we are and that knowing that we can do it, for $690 million, it's not a big ask. We all know how disruptive it was for so many families to be able to continue their work when everything shut down and not to have any kind of income or resources. And we know that the pandemic won't be our first or last crisis in the state, so that we need to build that infrastructure. So all of these asks, as well as our longer policy agenda, is available on our website, and I'll make sure to drop it in the chat. Today, we are releasing an updated social media toolkit. So if you want to get involved, we can share that with you as well for our coalition partners. And we are just, these asks are about recognizing that we have to prioritize those who are still suffering. The pandemic is not over for many. And the opportunity to use this massive surplus to build that infrastructure of support cannot be missed or understated in this moment. Because if we really want to achieve an equitable economy for the future of California's children and families, we know we're going to have to demand it. We know that we're going to have to come together and keep pushing and saying, we need childcare. And that means we need to pay our childcare providers. That means we need to rebuild the infrastructure that was lost better than it was before. We have to prioritize the mental health and the social emotional needs of our children because they also suffered during this pandemic. And we have to push our leaders to look past this political moment, past the moment of talking about sort of where the gases are and the milk, and knowing that we have billions of dollars that we can really put to work. And my former mentor, well, she's not my former boss, and my mentor, Marian Wright Edelman, would say, you just need to be a flea against injustice. Enough committed fleas biting strategically can make even the biggest dog uncomfortable and transform even the biggest nation. So together we can transform California. We're already doing it. There remains a lot of work to do ahead to actualize what we're imagining for every child and family, and we have to keep pushing. I'm so grateful for all the work and commitment that you all are showing to this, and I'm just happy to figure out how we can continue to partner together and continue to move forward. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Claire, you're on mute.
There we go. Nope, still muted.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Anyway, Shamika, thank you so much. We are totally dedicated to stand with you and Grace and the mission to realize the goals of ending childhood poverty. We, as an organization, have been in the fight starting long ago, but in most recent memory with fighting and winning the battle to repeal the maximum family grant. Some of those that are attending today may remember that. And we have, from that point forward, been supporting the various bills toward this really, really important goal. We have about 5 minutes to take questions, and I would like to ask sort of a meta question that I think those who maybe would oppose the plan. So I'm interested in your answer. Right now, and for the last 2 years, we have had a huge budget surplus. So we can make that argument that we have the money now. Now is the time to build for the future. But we can't always be certain, both because of crises and just the way things go, that California is always going to have this large budget surplus. So how can we support these programs into the future? And some of them, once they're in place, they are in place and will require constant funding if we cannot be assured of that kind of budget surplus.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question, right? Like, I mean, but again, we have to look at the larger picture. First of all, California has a number of, I don't remember the number offhand, but we have lots of money in reserve. Let me just put it that way. And so I know there's specific uses for those reserves, but we have, you know, in our austerity years, really try to take care and have a balanced budget and approach and put money away. And I think we have to also push back on this argument because number one, this is the second year in a row. So when are we going to start saying this is a budget surplus and this is just the budget, right? Because I do think that is a number one thing that we have to stop buying into. We've seen the growth economically. We see the businesses, you know, during the pandemic, the governor's economic task force was pulled together, and all of those folks who were there who were, you know, really pushing to have this equitable recovery and to build back better. But we also had all of our corporations there, you know, saying, what do we need to do to make sure that we're sustainable and long-term? And what did we see? Record profits still, right? And so I think at the end of the day, and even with this conversation that's also sort of tangentially out there about people leaving, you know, businesses leaving California, it's a red herring in some ways, right? To get us unfocused on what we know is true, which is, again, we have enough that what we need to do to make sure that everybody can be successful. Because if not everybody is successful in California, then we all suffer, right? So I think what we're seeing right now in Los Angeles in terms of the houselessness crisis, right? those are the results of policies from decades ago that have kept housing unaffordable, that have jailed too many people, and now they're coming home without a place to live or places to work, and without a social safety net. So I think what we have to really push back on this argument that we have to save more money. In fact, no, we need to save more people and build more resilient opportunities for children and families. And so I think that's what, I'm hoping that we can come together and really push back on, because that is going to take all of us to have really loud voices about this, because it will come up, and it's a reasonable question, right? So how can we make sure we're not in a deficit? We were thinking we were going to be in this huge deficit, right, at the beginning of 2020, and we keep getting proven wrong. Right. So I think we should figure out how we can do some better modeling, and then we'll know what the real budget is and what we have to work with.
Yeah, I love the notion. Let's not think about this as a surplus. It is what we have, and that we weren't modeling right necessarily when we initially set the budget. So that's a great framing. One quick other question about the failure of Build Back Better and the implications, that the federal monies that were hoped for haven't yet been forthcoming. Do you have a comment about that, and how the California legislators are dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say I'm so hopeful that it's not over. Washington's a hard place at times, and there's lots of just different distractions. But, even on the child tax credit and on the child care pieces, I think there will still be another opportunity before the end of the year. I'm hopeful with the appropriations and the budget that we don't lose, that we won't, that we'll get more than, may not get everything we want, but that we'll get some of it. It's unfortunate, because I think this is what happens often, when we have, Democratic majorities, is we end up being in this fight around, how do we get policy done in this stymied at the federal level. And there's just different approaches to it. And it's just really hard until we get over that hump of having all those votes. We get really stuck, and, we have a couple holdouts, and that's the problem with at the federal level, that if we were on one accord, we really would be governing much better than we are right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Barbara, was there any question that you would like to ask?
I saw some questions in the chat too. I'm happy to try and go back and ask.
All right. If you wouldn't mind looking at those and seeing if there are.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some in the chat.
I see the one on SB 854, so I'm happy to take that one. So we just passed out our second committee last week, and so we're really excited about it. And we're going to turn our attention really to the budget process. And so the way it's currently focused in the bill language, children from 0 to 9 would have an initial investment of $4,000, and children 10 to 17 would get $8,000, so that they have a little bit more time. You have more because they have less time for it to grow and as an investment. And so we're predicting, depending on whether, at the very low end, the state, we're looking at sort of the retirement investments of the 2%, the 6% range. That could be anywhere from another, for the little ones, upwards to $20,000. And for those who are older or more, it could be in the 30s if they have a 6% investment rate. And those who are older, between $10,000 to $15,000 when they emancipate. So, and that's assuming we get to start the program in 2023. So, and begin to build that out. So, so we're hoping that, the first cohort of children would have somewhere in between the range of that amount.
I think it's time for our next speaker.
Yes, so Shamika, excuse me. Thank you for all the great work you're doing. When you look down the chat, there's just, heartfelt thanks and appreciation for your work and the direction California is going in. And it's going in that direction because of the advocates that demand it. And you're leading that charge, and we're right behind you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And you all have a wonderful Advocacy Lobby Day. And just again, thank you for your leadership and your partnership.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Whew, that was sort of thrilling, actually. Well, now we get to hear from the experts on the specific bills that are identified as our priority bills. And Nabila Sosa, who was introduced earlier as our third partner in putting this program together, will moderate that section. Thank you, Nabila.
Thank you. Awesome. So now we're just gonna make sure that we can pin our next speaker. And I think that the transition allows us all to breathe and take a moment or two to just kind of sort of like, think about the amazing speakers that we had. And now we're really gonna deep dive into the meat and potatoes, as they say. We're gonna talk about the 3 priority bills, and it is my honor to bring the first speaker. Her name is Sarah Goodman, and she comes from the Office of Assembly Member Bauer Cahan, who authored our priority bill, AB 1666, to protect abortion access. She staffs the Assembly members' gender equality and reproductive rights legislation, as well as the Legislative Jewish Caucus. We're very excited to hear from her and to hear more about Priority Bill AB 1666. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all so much for having me. It's really such an honor to get to speak, especially as a staff member. Obviously, my boss is the champion on this issue for her entire career, both outside of the legislature and in the legislature. And as an attorney herself, I know that adding legal protections for abortion care is one of her top priorities. I'm here to speak to you mostly as a resource to answer questions, talk about the bill, and hopefully give you a better sense of where my boss is coming from. So I hope I'm able to do that justice. AB 1666 came in response to really a fundamental abdication on a federal level of the protections for reproductive choice. The Supreme Court has largely left the regulation of reproductive care up to the states at this point, as we've seen across the country with kind of a surge of anti-choice legislation. So we felt that, my boss felt, it was really California's turn to stand up on the state level for reproductive rights and proactively protect what's legal in California and legal federally, and make sure that nothing gets infringed upon within the borders of the state in terms of a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. Fundamentally, the question is not whether abortions will happen. They're going to happen. It's a question of whether we ruin people's lives or whether we protect them and keep them healthy and safe, or make sure that it's not a complete financial burden and devastating to the individual. So AB 1666 simply declares that any action inhibiting what is legal under California's Constitution, the legal right to choose reproductively, any action against that cannot be carried through California courts in terms of civil penalties, civil actions. Many bills attacking reproductive choice are quite expansive. They address both the individual who might seek reproductive care, but also the person providing that care, all the way to someone that might aid with that care. And that definition is so expansive in many cases that it can encompass an individual that might donate to a reproductive care organization, or an individual that might drive someone to seek reproductive care. And that's not even talking about the implications for the individual who is seeking care. So it's really a incredibly broad, these laws, in terms of their implications, and putting forward legislation to proactively protect California residents, those who are inside California, from civil penalties that can be up to tens of thousands of dollars for simply aiding with care and also receiving care, is the goal of this legislation. So it's pretty straightforward and simple as you read it. simply declares that California will not enforce judgments against the type of care that's perfectly legal and protected under California's Constitution. I'm more than happy to answer questions, and we so appreciate your support. Every single person adding their voices to support this bill makes a huge difference, especially because of the vociferousness of much of the opposition. So thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability. I do want to preface and say that I am not an attorney, and this is truly an attorney's bill. If there are any attorneys on the line, you might recognize that. So I will answer to the best of my abilities, and we have been in extensive consultation with many constitutional lawyers, as well as my boss, who's an attorney. But I want to preface that this is quite a complex bill.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And please give our thanks to the Assemblywoman for being a champion on such an important work. As Sarah mentioned, if you have any questions in the chat that are not too legal, please feel free to add them in the chat and I'll read them as they come through. I do have a question to ask you, and this is around telehealth. And the question is, is the bill going to also provide protections to California's, who offer telehealth guidance out of state for out-of-state patients?
Yeah, thanks for that question. What I can say fully is that this bill will protect within California everything that is currently legal on the state level and federally. It also provides a legal tool for attorneys that are defending folks that are accused in court of various things. It provides a legal tool for them to make their arguments. Obviously, the law is honestly relatively fluid, especially around these issues. So what it definitively protects is what's legal federally and in the state, and it provides a precedent and a tool for attorneys to make their arguments to protect choice generally. In terms of telehealth specifically, it's quite a complex area of law because it's still developing. The intention of the bill is specifically pertaining to California. Once you're going over kind of a border, whether it be virtually or in person, the lines get fuzzier, and honestly, the implications are unclear at this point. But the bill isn't specifically designed to pertain to that, because if a doctor is practicing in another state virtually, it's quite possible that their license is on the line in that state, and then licensure gets involved, and it becomes even more messy. So I don't have a perfectly clear answer on that because we just haven't seen it play out yet. But the intent of the bill is to protect everything that we can protect within California.
Thank you for that. And I do see a question in the chat. And Jill is asking, how can we protect those out-of-state people who come to California to get an abortion once they go back to their state? If there's any way that we can protect those people, again, any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, so this is really kind of the heartbreaking part about being in state government. We can't protect people when they go to another state. We fundamentally can't. Once they're in once they're in the borders of another state, they're 100% under that state's jurisdiction and the federal government. But the federal government has decided through the vehicle of the Supreme Court that it's up to the state, and that those bills, at least up to this point, stand. So what you can do to support those people that go back to their home states is donate to support organizations, to legal aid organizations, to reproductive rights organizations based in the states that are less protective of reproductive rights. But unfortunately, from a California legal perspective, we can't impose our laws across state borders. Similarly, especially this kind of thing, similarly to the way that we're trying to protect California from having laws imposed across our state borders.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. And then there's another question, and folks are asking if someone is working on a hotline, giving help for a person who's getting an abortion, and this hotline worker is not a medical person or personnel, is this person protected under the bill?
They should be if they are in California. As long as they're staying in California, if they're pursued for legal actions for aiding abortion, it should not be carried through under this bill.
Yes, that makes sense. So Sarah, let me move a little bit away from asking you technical questions around the bill, and maybe you can give folks in the call, all of them are going to be at some point meeting with elected officials, pushing for this bill to pass. What would you tell them would be like one of the best ways to take on this conversation, right? As you mentioned, this bill has a lot of legality and a lot of terms that, come with a lot of, understanding of the law. So what would be like the best approach for someone that is fairly new to advocacy and they just want this bill to succeed? They just want the legislator to understand the importance of the bill. What would you tell a person in having those conversations with their elected officials?
That's a great question. First of all, the right to choose is a really deeply personal fight for many people. So really speaking to the fundamental importance of protecting reproductive choice is always the core of anything that we're doing with this. And it's not important, let the legislators, let the lawyers that write the legal briefs on all of our bills worry about the technicalities and really speak to, why California must stand up for reproductive choice for all the many people who will be devastated and are being devastated by the backsliding in terms of reproductive rights across the country. So getting to the core of the issue, I think, is the most important thing. In terms of the bill specifically, I think that for me, it's about California standing up for what California already protects, what's already legal here, what we have decided is important as a reproductive rights state, and making sure that no other laws across the country can infringe on our values in California.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. I think that, oftentimes we get nervous when we don't understand some of the language in bills. And I think you touched a very beautiful point, and that is everyone has the right to choose. And when we are approaching these conversations with our elected officials, stories trump any statistics. Some of you were brave enough to share with us earlier today your own, even just the fact that you have a personal abortion story. And I assume that most of you were able to access abortion care without any legal or fear of any repercussions. So I think that that's the message across for this bill, why this matters, because as you continue to see around the nation, there's a lot of laws that are taking people's ability to choose. Again, thank you, Sarah, so much. I don't know if you have any last minute message for folks or thoughts before we let you go.
May I be forced before we let her go? Nabila, can I ask a question?
Please.
Thank you. So Sarah, I'm wondering, is California the only state right now that is proposing such a bill, or are you aware of it being in other states?
There's movement across the country. I know there's legislation in Connecticut, in New York, I believe in, I don't want to name the state wrong, but there's legislation across the country. There's been coverage in the New York Times and several other publications about kind of this dynamic between different states on what they're proactively protecting. So I definitely encourage you to look into the movement across the country to protect the right to choose. It's not just red states legislating. We're trying to work to stand up for reproductive rights as well.
I also have one question, if I may ask it, if we have a moment.
Yeah.
I know that you don't want to get into the legal technicalities of this, but the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution is clearly implicated in this, which says some version, and I'm surely not a lawyer, but that states need to recognize and respect the laws imposed by other states. And my question is, given how incredibly controversial this is, it seems to me that it's not unlikely that it will go up to the Supreme Court because this is ultimately a decision by the Supreme Court on, sort of how to interpret that clause of the US Constitution, which has been, as I understand it, been like everything else in the Constitution, being reinterpreted over the ages. And so is there some worry that once California hopefully does pass this, that it will then be challenged and sort of hung up on its way to the Supreme Court?
Any bill can be challenged. I know that this is a particularly contentious one, but I think the real answer is we don't let fear of reactionary suits keep us from passing important good laws and protecting people for as long as we can. So it's possible, but it's possible for anything we pass, especially on reproductive rights. I believe that Barbara was referring to the federal Supreme Court, although obviously a challenge would go through several different
Yes.
modes, but because this pertains to kind of cross-state jurisdictions, it would probably end up somewhere in the federal circuit if it were to be challenged. The bill was designed to fall within the public policy exemption to the full faith and credit clause. However, interpretations within the US legal system vary widely across any law, across any exemption, especially when it regards to the Constitution. So I can't speak to the future, but our philosophy when it comes to making laws is if it's not on its face unconstitutional, which it is not, it's not worth censoring ourselves when it comes to making good bills.
Right. I say amen to that.
Thank you for those two questions, Barbara and Claire. If there's no any lingering thoughts, Sarah, then we can let you go. Thank you so much for your time again. And we would look forward to continuing to champion this such an important bill.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your support. I know the Assembly member is so grateful and really loves this organization. So thank you all so much and really appreciate your work.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, that was great. Hopefully, a lot of you got to understand a little bit more. Now we're going to shift gears, and I am very pleased to introduce Lori Furstenfield, and she's going to be speaking on AB 92. And AB 92 aims at alleviating financial barriers for childcare. Lori is an attorney who has been a passionate social injustice and racial justice advocate for families and children for over 20 years. So a lot of experience. And she has been at the Child Care Law Center since 2013. She has crafted many policies that increase the availability of affordable, enriching childcare, and also to ensure that parents keep their childcare as they improve housing and land use. We are honored to have you, Lori. Please take it away.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Barbara, Claire, and NCJW. We always appreciate your leadership and your partnership. It's always a pleasure and an honor to work with all of you. So thank you. So I think it would be helpful to start with first, just giving a very brief overview of what subsidized childcare is in California to level set. So in California, for those of you who don't know, we have publicly funded childcare. It's funded by the state and it's also funded by the feds. And the main program that we have is a non-entitlement program, meaning parents may qualify for it, but they don't necessarily get it. And so the way that most families qualify for childcare in California is based on their income, meaning they make under 85% of the state median income. There is a small portion of a program called CalWORK Stage 1 where it is an entitlement, but like I said, this program that I'm about to discuss is not an entitlement program. And one of the main problems with the program is that while thousands and thousands of families qualify, they're not getting it. And that's because there's not enough money in the state and federal budget to fully fund all the families who would qualify. The other main problem is that the amount of the subsidy, parents who are lucky enough to get a subsidy to help pay for their childcare in California, it's not worth enough to pay a provider a living wage. So every year, childcare advocates, NCJW, the Stronger California Coalition, we're always advocating every year for more money for childcare so that more families who have the least resources are able to access affordable childcare, and so that providers can be paid a living wage. So now I'll move on to family fees. So while I was just talking about subsidized childcare, it is not free. There is a fee that parents must pay that goes along with the subsidy. And once a parent or the family starts making 40% of state median income, the state charges them a fee that goes along with it. And the fee is based on the family's income, whether they need part-time or full-time care, and the number of family members. And that's on top of the co-payment, the true cost of care. So for example, let's say I have a subsidy, it's worth $700. My provider charges $1,000 for childcare. If I'm making over 40% of state median income, on average in California, families pay about $250. So I have to pay $250 out of my own pocket, plus the difference that the provider charges. So if my provider charges $1,000 and my subsidy is only worth $700, I'm also paying on top of the family fee that $300 difference. So essentially, affordable childcare in California becomes unaffordable. And what ends up happening is families drop out of the program because they cannot even afford publicly funded childcare. The other impact is that providers are not always paid in full. So remember how I said the subsidy is not always worth, the amount is not a living wage for them. In California, about half of the childcare programs have the parents pay the provider directly. And what ends up happening is many providers, because they love and care for the children and the families, they tell the mom, you know what, I know you don't have gas in your car. I know you don't have food in the fridge. I am not going to take that money from you. So they end up not getting paid the full amount. And what has essentially happened in California, it's mainly women of color with few resources subsidizing other women with few resources in California. So that is a brief description of the childcare system and the family fee issue in California. Now, during COVID, the federal government said to all the states, you can waive family fees for all families through September 30th, 2024. We have family fees in California in part because the federal funding requirements require it. But during COVID, we can waive this, and this is what we want to do. And last year, AB 92 was introduced, and it passed halfway through the budget. So the legislature and the governor decided to waive family fees through June 30th of 2022 this year. It expires. But meanwhile, we could do it till September 30th, 2024. So that's what we're advocating for. Okay, next slide, please. So I'd like to share how family fees are having a real impact. The waiving of family fees are having a real impact on families. We have heard from parents, mainly Parent Voices, who we've partnered with and are co-organizational co-sponsors of this great bill, how it's impacting their lives. So we've heard from families that they can now pay for rent. They're not choosing between paying for gas, rent, food, necessities. I recently talked with two moms who were able to combine the savings and family fees from the past year with their prior savings, and they've put down payments on homes. So these waiving of family fees, they're not just having short-term impacts, they're having long-term impacts for the financial growth of families throughout California. What I'd like to do is share Caitlin's story. I'm going to read from it, so excuse my not looking at the screen, but I really wanted to share her story because I think it's so important and drives home why the impact of waiving family fees is so important. Hello, my name is Caitlin Hudson, and I live in Novato. I have a daughter who is 7 years old and a 1-year-old son. I am part of Parent Voices in Marin County. When I was told I did not have to pay my family fee until July 2022, I was so thrilled and was able to enroll myself in the spring semester of community college, something I have dreamed about for a long time. Freezing family fees allowed me to dream big and finally pursue my dream of pursuing a college degree. Now I can role model for my kids how important education is. It was great knowing I had just a little extra money each month to pay for the extra cost of school. I also enrolled my daughter into gymnastics. She has always wanted to join, but I could not afford. I love watching her tumble and be part of a team. As a parent, these are moments every parent dreams of for our kids. Let me share what my budget looks like every month so you can understand why keeping family fees frozen is essential for my family. I work as a bank teller and bring home about $3,100 per month. My rent is $2,100, eating up 2/3 of my paycheck. Between gas, electric, phone, internet, my car payment, as well as insurance and gas, I have around $5 left over every month, leaving no room for any emergencies or unexpected costs. I rely on high interest credit cards to keep this merry-go-round going. The family fee waiver is also allowing me to enroll my son in full-day childcare. Remember I said the family fee is based on the amount of care? So what ends up happening is many parents can only work part-time because they can only afford the fee for part-time, but now Caitlin can work full-time. He was born during COVID, and from the day he was born, my 1-year-old son, I had him on a wait list for the only infant center in Marin County that accommodated my work schedule. I was fortunate enough to find childcare for him, but they didn't open until 8:30 a.m. I had to reduce my work hours, losing income in order to have any care at all. My childcare was far out of my way as well. It added 30 minutes to my commute in both the morning and afternoon. Not having accessible childcare close to home is a hidden cost for families, especially with gas prices so high. It takes time away we could be spending with our kids. All of this adds additional stress as well. And during this time, I felt an impact on my mental health. I called every month for 18 months, hoping for space to open for my son so we could go back to a more normal routine. I was finally able to find an infant center near my home after 18 months on the waiting list. But I can't get back the hours I spent in the car, the money I lost on childcare and work, and can't take away the stress of having more on my plate because of the lack of childcare. If I have to start paying my $374 family dollars in family fees again, so Caitlin pays $374 a month, I will have to drop back to part-time care for my son, take my daughter out of gymnastics, and scramble to have enough to pay for the cost of staying in college myself. After the last 2 years of distance learning, I don't want to take away that stability from my kids. I can feel the stress level rising just thinking about the family fees coming back, especially since the child tax credit that I was receiving stopped in December. California needs to take action to protect working families like mine. We need to pass a budget that extends the family fee waiver, which has allowed me to pursue my educational goals, provide experiences for my daughter, and enroll my son in full-day care. All providers deserve a living wage that allows them to not only keep their doors open, but to thrive. And that is Caitlin's story. The fees for the state. I see a question in the chat. The fees for the state and federal subsidies, are there, I'm sorry, I can't, how are the fees? I think that might be how high are the fees?
Yeah, I think so.
Why? Good question. I think, well, to really break it down, it's all rooted back into institutionalized racism. Punishing women of color for, and women, non-women of color for needing to be responsible for living in poverty and having to pay into the system to show that they deserve it. The other origin of family fees is that the legislature thought that, or proclaimed to think that families with childcare subsidies need to learn how to pay their bills. So once families start making more money, let's have them start paying for childcare so they get used to it. When in fact, all the parents we know, they run their budget, plan for their budget like no other family. They really know how to pay their bills. So having requiring the family fee is really a symptom of just this longstanding system of punishing people for being, for not having money and needing, needing childcare assistance. So it is a federal mandate, and we're hoping that that will change with the federal proposal, the budget proposal that has been going through, reconciliation the last few months. The family fees would be almost eliminated and only be charged to families with much higher incomes. So what you can move on to the next slide, please. So what AB 92 does is it's the policy bill, and the current language in it, just to be clear, it says that family fees would only be waived till October 31st, 2023. But the bill will be amended shortly to mirror the budget ask, which is $187 million to waive fees through September 30th, 2024. The other part of what the bill would do, and we're hoping that it will pass through budget trailer language, is to implement an equitable fee schedule. So while states are required to charge for family fees, California's could be much more affordable and a lot more equitable. Right now, families can be charged up to 10% of their income. So families, like I said, on average pay about $250 a month, but it can be up to $600 a month. And so what AB 92 does is ensures that families do not pay family fees if they're earning under 75% of state median income, and they're charged no more than 1% of their income for family fees. So it would be much lower. And no, McCarty is not the author of AB 92. It's actually Assembly Member Gomez Reyes. McCarty was, I think there may be some confusion because there was some confusion last year. He authored a bill called AB 22, which was part of the same package. And if you would like to read more about family fees, we have information here on our webpage that explains the bill, what family fees are, talking points for lobby visits. We also have a letter that we are sending to the governor tomorrow. If you would like to sign on, we would love your support, asking the governor to prioritize the waiving of family fees in his May revise. And already we've submitted a letter to the legislature with over 300 signatures to make waiving family fees a budget priority. Does anybody have any questions? I know I kind of sped through that. Barbara?
Yes, we do have a few questions. I know that you were so great at answering some of these questions on the chat, but we have a few questions. The first one is, we understand that there's a substantial share of funds that goes to childcare and other youth programs that comes specifically from the taxing of cannabis. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen, or what will happen if it gets eliminated, and what are the implications?
Yes, so so in California, the only dedicated source of funding besides for CalWORKs for childcare is the Prop 64 funding, which is for cannabis. And it's a small portion, but it's significant. All the other money comes from the general fund. So like I said, every year we have to fight for more money. Prop 64 is a dedicated source of funding. And what would happen if that was eliminated, then the child care and youth programs want to get that money. So what we're asking for is if the governor and the legislature decide to void Prop 64 or not tax the cannabis industry, that a dedicated source of funding replaces that funding.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And then there's another question around the loss of childcare providers. Is it true? Well, I know it's true, but can you talk a little bit more about the loss of childcare providers during the pandemic, and what is the plan, if there's any plan on replacing them?
Oh, yes, it's a huge effort right now. So even before the pandemic, there is a huge shortage of childcare. Only 23% of families in California could find childcare. So the availability is very scarce, and it's in large part due to the low wages and lack of benefits. And so we're pushing major legislation this year to increase the pay for providers, a 20% increase, and ensure that they have retirement and sick leave benefits. Yes, we did lose childcare providers during the pandemic. The numbers are still being analyzed right now on how much of a loss there has been. But that's been our plan even before COVID, is increasing the pay. But I think now with the pandemic, it's really elevated how the lack of childcare really impacts every facet of our society. Parents, teachers, they can't go back to work without affordable childcare.
Yes, that's so true. Thank you for that. And I know we're going to I'm going to come kind of sort of like back to one of the comments that you said, and that was around the governor's May revised budget. And I know that part of the ask for this bill is an additional budgetary ask of $187 million. What do you think is the role of us as a faith community to ensure that the governor does allow this $187 million to be added? What can we do in terms of advocating, aside from us meeting with our elected officials during our lobby week efforts?
I think there's so many things. There's this letter that you all can sign that we're going to be sending to the governor. Keep on elevating it with your officials. We've heard that we have actually strong support in the Assembly and the Senate for this budget ask, but we still need to make sure we're continuing the push, because last year we were told that we got messages that it would be waived for 2 years, and the legislature decided only until June 30th of 2022 this year. I think elevating the stories of parents makes the most impact of why to move the governor's office and the legislature to ensure that this is a priority. Tweets, we frequently do calls to action. So on our Child Care Law Center webpage, you can sign up for calls to action. And I will drop that into the chat in a moment of how you can participate. But tweets, sharing stories, those all are really helpful.
Thank you for that, Lori. And then my last question for you is, what do you think is, or what do you see as one of the biggest challenge in developing any kind of childcare system in California?
Money. I mean, that's what it all boils down to. I can get into all the intricate, things, but I think it really comes down to advocating for money to fund, because childcare has been woefully underfunded since it became available in California in the late 70s. And it's never in its history been available to all families who qualify. If we could really push for that federal money, that would make a huge, huge difference in California. So I think pushing at the state level, the federal level would make a really big difference. And it's fully funding it.
Thank you. And then there's another question in the chat. Lisa's asking, how do we lobby for other sources of funding to replace current Prop 64 funding?
There is a person, Jim Keddy, he's heading this effort, and I will I will drop his contact information into the chat. And he also has a sign-on letter that he was submitting to the legislature and the governor's office regarding this issue.
Awesome, thank you. Barbara or Claire, do you have any lingering questions for Lori.
It's not so much a question as a encouragement to all who are listening that when Barbara and I send out alerts through our rapid response team, at various points, there is advocacy required, as Lori was describing with the governor, as well as through the committee process. The way our voices can be heard, particularly our faith voices can be heard, is through our responding to these action alerts that we will send. I don't think we can put the link in the chat. However, following today's program, we will send out to all of the attendees the link to the rapid response team. And I really encourage you, when you receive these requests for action, to please respond. They're very meaningful. Lori, is that not true?
Oh, yes, it makes such a big difference, really. Your voices make a really big impact on the legislature and the governor.
I do have a question. A lot of legislators are moved by economic responses. And are there figures, surveys, whatever, that show that having good childcare, I'm sure there are, impacts the child's whole life and their earning potential through the rest of their life and keeps them out of homelessness, which is a huge expense?
Yes, there are many studies, research, and advocacy efforts that highlight that research. There's so many benefits to childcare, and many of which are the ones that you just highlighted.
Please mute themselves.
There's a little bit of echo. If folks can please mute themselves, if you're not speaking, that would be greatly appreciated so we can hear Lori. Are you still with us, Lori? I think you're having.
Yes,
some-
I just put myself on mute just for a second to see if that would resolve, but I don't think
Thank
it
you.
was my speaker. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say one more thing about Lori, and those of you who have joined us in the past know that one of the coalitions that is been front and center in our work over the last decade or so, or maybe not quite that long, is a coalition called Stronger California. That is a coalition of a whole range of organizations, and including the one that Lori is from, and that advocates on the behalf of women, family, and children, by and large also. And it's, I think, become enormously more powerful over the last numbers of years that we've been joining our voices together. And so that's by way of saying that we really can have an impact, because it's not just us. It really is us joining hands with our by and large sisters across the state and a whole range of organizations to lift up a set of key priority pieces of legislation, including this one.
Thank you for that, Barbara. Lori, any last minute thoughts or any pointers for folks as they are getting ready to meet with their elected officials?
I just want to thank you all for your leadership and support of this important issue, and also the other issues that were elevated during the lobby day. And that if you need talking points for the freezing of family fees, please go to our website. And I'm dropping it again here. We have talking points that are really easy and straightforward to read. If you go to, let's see, the basics. Yep, this is the website. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori. And all of you folks should have gotten the packet from Barbara and Claire or from your section leaders with the talking points. And I think that we're going to continue to say this again and again. Stories matter more than any statistics you can give legislators. So if you have a story, if you know someone that's impacted because of these costs, then that story will overtrump any statistics you can give elected officials. Elected officials and people move through stories, and your stories are powerful. So thank you again, Lori, for
Thank
joining
you.
us this morning.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Awesome. So now we are going to hear from our last speaker, Tina Rosales. It is my pleasure to introduce her. Tina Rosales is an attorney and a policy advocate on Western Center's housing team, where she works on land use policies, housing production for people of low income to no income, homelessness issues, fair housing, and a bunch of, or an array of related issues to housing. Tina previously worked on neighborhood legal systems in LA County, where she worked on landlord and tenant litigation and homelessness issues. Today, Tina will be speaking on our last priority bill, SB 1816, which addresses homelessness in a very innovative manner. Tina, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that great introduction and saying my name right. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for having me present on AB 1816. This is a Bryan and Calra bill called the Reentry Housing and Workforce Development Program. It is sponsored by Western Center, Housing California, the Coalition for Supportive Housing, People Assisting the Homelessness Path, LARP, which is the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership, and the Reentry Providers Association of California. That is a mouthful. So we have quite a few sponsors for this bill, and it was previously last year AB 328 by Assembly Member Chu. And so it was a 2-year bill. We're bringing it back. So before I talk about the bill, I kind of just want to introduce myself and Western Center. I'm not sure how familiar y'all are with our organization, but my name is Tina Rosales. I am a housing attorney. I've been barred since 2017 from San Francisco. I went to UC Hastings, and I worked in unlawful detainer defending tenants in Los Angeles, as well as my favorite part, which was suing the city of LA and the housing authority and people for violating tenants' rights. And now I do sort of more policy advocacy and less on the litigation side. But Western Center is such a wonderful organization, and it was founded during the Watson riots about 50 or so years ago in Los Angeles, and it is the state's oldest anti-poverty nonprofit legal services support and policy advocacy center, particularly in Sacramento. You're one of the oldest organizations that represent thousands of low-income, no-income Californians with the goal of eradicating poverty in the state. And we do that by advancing different types of bills and agendas related to housing, health, consumer advocacy, things of that nature. And we are very proud of AB 1816, and the goal of this bill is really to provide stable housing and workforce development for formerly incarcerated, recently incarcerated individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So this bill is kind of a little bit out of the purview of Western Center. It does touch upon housing and establishing housing for folks who were formerly incarcerated in state institutions. But normally Western Center tends to work on very traditional areas like health, landlord-tenant, land use, things of that nature. But I kind of roped us into this bill as a baby lobbyist. This is only my second year lobbying, and so I don't know why I came and I was like, we need to do this bill. This is going to be fantastic. And it's all about the budget, which is also something prior to this job I've never done before other than my own personal budget, which also is in shambles. So I don't know why I thought AB 1816 is going to be great. But I will tell you, personally, why I really wanted to support this bill. As I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised in San Francisco in the Mission District, and I have, I'm one of 6 siblings to a single mom, and she raised me along with my grandmother, who was an activist in the city and has a photo of Dianne Feinstein eating spaghetti, like way back in the day when Feinstein was all about the San Francisco. And my grandma has these cards from Moscone. So I grew up in sort of an activist environment. But one of the reasons why I particularly went to law school was because while I was surrounded by all of these wonderful, faith-driven, strong Latino women, the one thing missing in my life was my father. And my dad was in and out of incarceration my whole life. He suffered from mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and so I didn't have him in my life for even to this day. You know, he was constantly in and out of incarceration, and a lot of it, you know, were different crimes or whatnot. But one of the things I noticed is that he also didn't have access to stable housing. And because he didn't have access to stable housing, he couldn't really get his foot in the door to anchor his life and move forward and then be a part of his children's lives. You know, when folks are incarcerated, it doesn't just impact the individual, but it also impacts their family and their children. And it impacts society and how we respond and we react. And I have, you know, vivid memories of if I did want to go see my dad, I would have to go, you know, to the park where a trailer he was at, or walking down the streets and seeing some other relatives of mine in, you know, homeless because they had nowhere to go. And one of my uncles actually lived in a single room occupancy hotel because he suffers from schizophrenia. And I remember the day that he was almost immediately evicted, and I had a very odd experience of almost representing him in that case as a law fellow, but you know, they threatened him with incarceration. And so I kind of have that background of really wanting to support folks who were formerly incarcerated and experiencing homelessness, because I wish that this was a bill that had been around when I was younger, because maybe that could have made things a little bit different for my dad and for other family members. So that's kind of why I told Western Center we need to do this bill, even though I have no idea what we're doing, but we need to get something on the ground to support folks who were formerly incarcerated. And, you know, I really do think that if we would have had a bill that focused on what's going to happen to folks after they leave state incarceration, they can't just go, you know, with the CDCR, with the California Corrections and Rehabilitation, because those programs don't work, right? Like, people need safe, stable, affordable housing, you know, not SROs, which are filled with cockroaches and, you know, basically an extension of state prisons, but they really need safe, stable, formative housing with services for those who actually need the services, whether that's substance abuse, mental health assistance, and then workforce development. You know, my dad was and still is a relatively good mechanic, and I just wish that he would have had a program where they could have, you know, helped with his workforce development as being a mechanic. He worked specifically on older cars from like the 60s. 1964 Purple Impala was my favorite. And I don't know if they still are making those with the way that California is going towards electricity, but, you know, if they could have had a program where he had housing, but also the workforce part of it, then I think that would have really changed the trajectory of his life, as well as the lives of many people he was, you know, incarcerated with. So 1816 is primarily focused on addressing California's long-standing housing and homelessness crisis, which, as you all know, we've had this problem since way before the pandemic, and the pandemic's just making it worse. But one of the interesting things is California is also closing a lot of state prisons. So more and more people are going to be released from prison. And it's only, state prison. We're not looking at federal prison. So it's only those within the jurisdiction of the state. And where are all of the folks going to go? Right? Like 20% of people who are released from incarceration are going to be released into homelessness because they have nowhere to go. There's numerous studies, and I can spout data at you that shows there's a link between homelessness and incarceration. You know, we know that in San Francisco, half the people on parole have experienced, homelessness at some point in their life, and statewide, it's about half of the people as well who have experienced some sort of incarceration while they're also homeless, experiencing homelessness, And we also know that the legal system, the criminal legal system, tends to have a higher rate of impacting those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so homelessness also disproportionately impacts those folks. And so what we're trying to do is we are trying to offer those who are in the system a way to reintegrate into society by providing a housing first model. And so what it's going to do is it doesn't limit folks on, length of stay. They can stay however long in this program as they need to. And it provides services that will promote housing stability and employment, which has been proven to reduce recidivism. And so, there's been studies that show formerly incarcerated and formerly tenants who were experiencing homelessness in these types of programs were able to reduce incarceration by over 60% and reduce recidivism rates, by over 60%. So these programs do help keep people housed, but it also helps society as a whole because then they're not committing additional crime. It's also cheaper, like a lot cheaper, to give somebody supportive housing than it is to incarcerate them. California has a budget surplus. We have a lot of money, as our previous speaker has said. We spend about $13 billion a year incarcerating people in this state. That's a lot of money. That's more than we spend on, education, housing, healthcare. Like it's a lot of money. It blows my mind. And we spend about $140,000 per person a year in incarceration, whereas the taxpayers spend around $36K a year in chronic homelessness services. So, those are like emergency services, things of that nature. But this proposal would only cost $20,000 a year per individual, and it would reduce recidivism by 7-fold. So it's a cheaper program than if we were to house the people, than if we were to incarcerate individuals or if we were to leave them chronically homeless. So it is going to end up in the long run saving California a lot of money, but it is a program that hasn't been done in the state. There are, San Diego has a really good program that shows the efficacy of this type of program. And we are asking for $20 million a year for 5 years to create this program, sort of like a pilot, which, given our budget surplus and problems with the GAN limit, we do recognize there may be some pushback with that amount, especially because, we just have other obligations constitutionally that we have to pay for. But looking at the long term, by investing in this type of program for folks who have been recently incarcerated, it'll reduce recidivism and it'll be a lot cheaper than if we were to spend that money on, more prisons, which the governor has already said he doesn't want to do because he's demanding that people get released. And we're going to have to deal with where those folks go. So basically, it's going to work a lot with, continuums of care, nonprofit housing services, reentry services, workforce. So really is, excuse me, I'm so sorry. I'm getting over this random cold that my niece gave me. She's 2 and she brought it back from wherever children bring disease, like illnesses from. So, excuse me. So it's going to partner with them, and it's also going to partner with HCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development, to administer this program and really get folks from incarceration to stable housing. And so it'll reduce recidivism by 7-fold. I think that was the question, but I can come back to the question in the chat in a little bit. Excuse me. And so just, I don't have like a whole much more to say. I'm hoping that we can open it up in a little bit and have an open dialogue, but just to demonstrate how this program would work. TAF, which is one of our co-sponsors, has a similar program in San Diego. And PATH is a wonderful organization. They are a nonprofit homeless services providers, and they have stations over 150 cities across the state. I worked with them personally in the Lawyers Preventing and Ending Homelessness program in Los Angeles. And so they were one of our partner organizations. And their program partners with San Diego Sheriff's Department and through the Health and Services Agency. So it's a little bit different than HCD. We're going with HCD because we think it's going to, they know how to run these programs already statewide. And so San Diego worked with an organization that runs their program. And what it did was the county staff referred folks who qualified to PATH before their release date. So they were able to build rapport, talk to the individuals about their parole, what type of services they're going to need, things of that nature. And then when they were released with a PATH case manager type of individual that helps them find housing and get into the workforce development program. And then they help the person basically with other things that they need. And let's see, PATH since 2019 has helped over 100 folks in San Diego access housing and supportive services. And I believe half of them are already sustaining themselves without the subsidy. So they were able to use the program, but now they are in their own permanent housing and they're not using the subsidy with the PATH program. And 3/4 of the recipients have not recidivated or been booked into jail for any reason. So that's a really, really positive step, since we know that most folks will recidivate if they do not have access to safe, stable, affordable housing and services. And the county estimated that this program was actually 20% cheaper than it would have been for the folks to reoffend and be reincarcerated. So we're kind of modeling it similar on the San Diego program for AB 1816, but just on a much larger scale. And really the goal is to, get people from incarceration to housing so they can reduce recidivism, reduce our homelessness crisis, and help people essentially get their lives back on track after they're incarcerated. So that's kind of it. That's my spiel. And I'm hoping we can open it up.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. We do have a few interesting questions in the chat, and then we have a few questions to ask you. But this one from David, and he's asking if AB 1816 covers those only released from state prisons, or is it also going to cover county and city jails?
Only state, because of state federal funding.
Right. Yes. Thank you so much. And then Pat is asking, how does AB 18 differ from AB 2670? And do you recommend that we support both?
Oh, I am not very familiar with 2670. I have to look that up.
Yeah, I was trying to look at it too. So for Pat, maybe that's something that will follow up with you. But I would say, listen, the more bills you support, the better, right? Hopefully, it's a good bill. But I'm pretty sure that if you brought it up, it's because it's a good bill. But yeah, we'll follow up with you, Pat, on that. And then there's another question around how many communities do you envision that this program would or this bill would help with? In particular, they're asking what kind of participants at the statewide level do you envision serving?
Yeah, it's mainly for folks who have been recently incarcerated and who are currently experiencing homelessness or will experience homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. So it's a really broad definition. And then formerly incarcerated can go back 5 years. So they don't have to recently, tomorrow be released because they were incarcerated. It goes back about 5 years. And so we're hoping that will hit a broader array of individuals. We want it kind of broad so that we can kind of help some folks who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. And we're hoping to have it throughout the state. Mm-hmm. I would think, though, just based on where sort of our prisons are and our largest population of those experiencing homelessness, this would probably hit the Los Angeles, Bay Area and parts of the Central Valley the most, but it's intended to be throughout the state. So we're looking at like Humboldt, Indio, all of the counties.
Got it. And Karen has a question in the chat, and she's asking around, there's already insufficient low to moderate housing income. And what do you think, or what do you expect of dealing with, how are we going to deal with the NIMBYism, right? Of like not wanting convicts living in their neighborhoods.
I mean, I have a sassy response, but I'm not going to give this sassy response because anyone could be committing crimes that you don't know about in the neighborhood, right? Like, but that's my criminal justice background coming up. I studied CJ in college, and I had the privilege of interviewing a lot of folks who were incarcerated for some pretty intense crimes like murders and serial killers and things like that. The goal of this program is really to provide folks a second chance and a second opportunity at housing. And so while I definitely understand the concern of people who don't want, who have the sort of 1980s stranger danger philosophy, where else are we going to put them? You know, I mean, we kind of have to do something. And I feel like this isn't a very eloquent response because it is a right concern of people having fear of individuals who've committed a crime living right next to them. But the goal of this program is to provide housing along with supportive services. And so when the supportive services come in, that can be, a person for mental health services. It could be getting them attached to substance abuse services. There's some parts of the program in, like places in San Francisco, which have navigation centers, and those will provide things like, let's get access to your family support. And so we know that when individuals have more and more support, it reduces the recidivism rate. And so it's going to reduce the crimes that the individual commits going forward. So those, while they are very real concerns, and I don't want to diminish them, the goal of this program is to provide the individual with as much support as possible, so the urge to commit a new crime or to recidivate is basically not going to be there.
Got it. Thank you for that. And then I think like one recurring theme that comes out of the chat is like, there isn't enough housing, right? So how are we going to be able to provide that housing for folks like, in this program?
Let me tell you, we don't have housing, right? In the state, we just don't. Like, we can be very honest about that. Although there are places where there's a lot of vacancy. So San Francisco has about half of their units that are available for rent are actually not being rented at all, and they're vacant, which is something that's a different, bill that we got to work on. But that is a very real concern about where are we going to house individuals. And the program is similar to, it will have like housing kind of similar to, Section 8 in a way, in that they'll pay for the market rate housing that is available. And then slowly the individual will be able to sustain it themselves. So the goal is not to put them in housing that they can't afford. It's to find affordable housing within their area, because when a person is on parole, they have to live in very specific areas. So we're gonna have to figure out a partnership with private entities in order to get the person housed, which is what we would do with other programs like Section 8 or VAWA vouchers, or vouchers for folks who are elderly or living with AIDS and things of that nature. So we do have the housing available. We just kind of have to find it, and it probably, I can imagine it not necessarily being like low income housing per se, but market rate with the subsidies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Barbara, Claire, any last minute thoughts or questions? And I will just say that part of it is like changing the narrative, right? Of changing the narrative of saying, hey, these folks cannot be living in our community. But I think like, changing narrative has to happen from, all of the different services that we give folks, right? From Section 8, from, all the different state programs, and local programs. Barbara, Claire, any last minute thoughts? Tina?
I would just like, oh, I'm sorry, Barbara. Tina, can you repeat the name of the program in San Diego? Was it PATH, P-A-T-H?
Yes, it is PATH. The program is called C3.
What's that first word?
Oh, sorry.
Let me.
There we go.
In the
Oh.
chat.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say there's a whole series of a lot of conversation going on in the chat around NIMBYism and so on. The fact of the matter, I was just in San Francisco, which is, and much of my family lives there. Actually, my son also grew up in the Mission, but anyway, he's a lot older than you are. But the fact is, and this is certainly true in Sacramento, the fact is that homeless folks are living in our communities. I mean, they're all around, they're camped out. I live in a pretty upscale community in Sacramento, and there's just tons of folks living 5 blocks from where I live under bridges. And so I think, recognizing that folks are living among us and are going to keep living among us, and that that we absolutely need to figure out various angles on the homeless problem. It's a multidimensional problem, and this is just one piece of the problem. But I was really stunned when reading your bill to discover this strong link between incarceration and homelessness. And I just want to say, for those of us that have advocated around this stuff for a while, that there's also this incredible pipeline between kids in foster care going right into prisons and then out onto the streets, and or on the streets and then into prisons and back onto the streets. So this also links a lot to the concern that NCJW has had around foster kids for a long time, and support for them. Anyway, and as well as folks who have mental health issues. Our prisons have become the major mental health providers in America, which is really astonishing. So just, thinking of the sort of prison population is a very complex population of folks that we're, housing, warehousing in one way or another. And I think then you make really important arguments about how this can be a cost-effective solution, particularly by bringing together so many different agencies and organizations within a local area to marry their services together in an effective way to provide sort of a whole panoply of services to folks. So anyway, thank you for sharing that with us, and for being the inspiration for it.
Oh, no, thank you. It was definitely, other folks are way more in the trenches than I am. I was probably a little selfish on this, thinking that, oh, this could have helped my dad and helped me growing up. But one last thing to say, and I feel comfortable saying this in this space since this is a faith-driven space, and I also grew up as in a faith community, and I think the narrative also should be shifted more towards compassion and having compassion for our unhoused neighbors. As Barbara said, homelessness is increasing and people are already in our communities. We just want to make sure that they have a safe space, that everybody has a safe space. And the first step is making sure people are housed.
So
and I think there was one more in the chat. doors. Yeah, so it's a little complex with the Section 8 voucher program because that's federal funding. And so with the Section 8 voucher program it's very difficult to get into it because of the federal funding. And I mean, getting on the wait list can take years. You know, we have stories of people on the wait list for 10 years before they're even allowed to apply for the voucher program. But once an individual does get the voucher, the problem is leasing up, which I think is what we had talked about earlier, is there enough housing available? And that's not necessarily because they can't pay for it, but it's because a lot of folks won't rent to folks with Section 8 vouchers or with government subsidy programs. So there is a little bit of a re-education campaign. And interestingly, the California Apartment Association actually supports this bill. And normally they do not, we're on opposing ends, but they do support bills like this, which will provide a way for people to get housing as well as the support services because they know about the positive impact that it's going to have. So a little bit different than Section 8. I was just using it because most people are aware of the Section 8 program, so it's kind of easier to have some parallels.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you again, Tina, for your time and your story, for being so brave and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate you so much. And I'm going to send it back to Barbara and Claire. Thank you, ladies.
So, well, we're at the end of a really interesting morning, I think. And some of you have meetings today with your legislators. Others have meetings scattered across the next few days. Either way, as you've heard this morning, our purpose is to help amplify the voices of Californians whose voices often go unheard and whose needs go unmet.
And at your visits, whether they are in person or via Zoom or phone, remember, you don't have to be the subject matter experts. You're there, as Tina said, because we believe in justice and the dignity of every human being, and because we're coming from a place of compassion. And you are their constituents, and it's their job to listen to you respectfully, even if they don't agree. And in turn, of course, we want to be respectful, even if we don't agree with them, and not get into an argument, but to calmly state our case. If you don't know an answer to a question that a legislator brings up, don't feel that you have to have all those answers. Let the legislator know that you'll get back to him or her with a researched answer or a referral to a person who might be able to answer. And as been said many times throughout today, and I think we've experienced it, personal stories are incredibly powerful. So you will have been trained by your delegation leaders, and possibly some of you will have personal stories that will be appropriate for your meeting and as your delegation leader has organized your group. So calmly state our position, stay on topic, and follow the training of your leaders.
Claire, I'd like to add something. I
Please
think
do,
it's
Anna.
particularly important on the reproductive justice bill
Mhm.
that we say we are coming from Jewish values, because too often it is assumed that religious communities are opposed to abortion rights. And we as Jewish women are involved in a Jewish tradition, which is thousands of years old, literally, that not only allows, but sometimes requires abortions if the woman's health is in danger in any way, psychologically or physically. And I think that it is a religious liberty issue for us. And I think that it should be stated that way.
Thank you, Anne, very much for bringing up that point. Again, that is part of our unique voice. that we bring to the legislators' offices that other abortion rights folks may not. And so thank you, Ann, for underscoring that. Barbara?
Yeah, yes, I agree, and thanks. And I think we said earlier that there's been multiple times in which that sort of faith voice has been absolutely essential in helping to pass bills, particularly around the kinds of issues that we're talking about now. And I wanted to sort of begin to close by reminding everybody that throughout the session, we've told you that our advocacy continues throughout the legislative session, and that we need your voices at key committee hearings, and before key votes. So please let us urge you to join the rapid response team so we can engage you easily. And for quick and easy advocacy, what's required is simply an email or a phone call to your legislature or to the legislative committee. The link for the, trying to see if it's here yet, no, but the link for the rapid response team will be in the chat after we close, and we'll leave it up for a while so that please click on it and join us. I want to thank, of course, all of our speakers, to the section committee members that we talked about earlier today, who were essential. This was really a new way of doing business on our part, and our sections throughout the state were really deeply involved in helping to evolve this program. And as you saw, I mean, Nabila was essential to helping us bring this all together. And so we thank all of you. And we thank those of you who sat here today through what's a long morning. We know that you've got lots of other things to do. We know that it's tiring to sit in front of a Zoom for hours and hours. But I think we'll all agree that there's a lot of moving voices we heard this morning. So take a moment to look at the chat before you close, and we'll have a contact information for all of the California sections. We have contact information for me and Claire, and we'll leave it up for a while for 5 minutes after the program closes, if you want to make notes. And so guys.
Barbara, I have a couple of other announcements. Somebody asked whether or not we've recorded today, and we have. So in our follow-up letter to all of you, thanking you for attending, and where we will include a live link to our registration for our rapid response team, because I'm not sure if it's going to make it into the chat today. We will also provide the link to today's recording. And then I have one really important final announcement on our Passover food favorite poll. Haroset was #1, and which always seems to be the case, by the way. And there was a close second, which was chocolate matzah, which I am presuming is, Trudy, yeah, I'm presuming is the same item that we call in my household chocolate matzah crack, because you can't stop eating it. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, it's basically matzah that you pour chocolate over, and you pour nuts on the chocolate, and it's addictive, to say the least. Came in close second. Anne, did you have something you wanted to say? Your hand is up. No. Okay.
Oh, guys, let's go out and make some good trouble out there. So, and thank you so much for joining us.